Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. We will now be beginning on the next segment, Sustainability Challenges in the Asia Pacific. When we first invite all the panelists out on stage, and we will have the opening remarks by Assistant Prof. Leah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here in the session of Sustainability Challenges in the Asia Pacific. So as we navigate in a world of crisis, this panel will bring together distinguished experts to explore the pressing environmental challenges and the transformative solutions that is shaping the future of this region. In the face of climate change, rapid urbanization, and resource scarcity, Asia Pacific stands at a pivotal crossroad. This panel will address how we can effectively tackle these issues through 1, innovative governance, 2, strategic policymaking, and 3, collaborative efforts. So let me now just say a few words about each panelist that we have here. So first, we have Prof. Lawrence Lowe. Prof. Lawrence is the director of the Center for Governance and Sustainability at NUS Business School, where he is a professor in practice of strategy and policy. At the Center for Governance and Sustainability, he leads key sustainability and climate change initiatives for Asia Pacific, ASEAN, and Singapore. He steers the Singapore Governance and Transparency Index and ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard. He also heads studies in business integrity and leadership diversity. Prof. Lowe received a PhD in management from the MIT. Then we have Ms. Melinda Martinez. She is the lead researcher at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute, where her work focuses on sustainable development, smart city initiatives, digitalization, and the institutional frameworks and policies for advancing climate ambition in ASEAN countries. She is also the production editor of ASEAN Focus, a section of ICS blog that spotlights ASEAN and regional developments. Additionally, she co-edits 2 of the Institute's annual survey reports, the State of Southeast Asia and the Southeast Asia Climate Outlook. And last but not least, we have Ms. Elizabeth Wu. Ms. Elizabeth Wu is a legal consultant with Client Earth Energy Systems, Asia team, and a visiting researcher at the National University of Singapore Asia Pacific Center for Environmental Law. Elizabeth works with the private and public sector and civil society on climate-related risks and opportunities in Asia, and leads on initiatives that explore the role of international economic law and corporate law to facilitate the net zero transition. Her work covers the intersection and alignment of international climate and environmental law with international investment and trade law, and corporate and investor engagement in support of net zero strategies. She also leads on regional judicial training and legal profession outreach. So now that we have welcomed the 3 panelists, maybe let me start with setting the stage with one question. The Asia-Pacific region is incredibly diverse, both in terms of its environmental landscapes and the socioeconomic challenges it faces. As we begin, could each one of you briefly share what you see as the most critical sustainability issue in the region today? Yes. Maybe we can start with...
Okay, let me start. First of all, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here among my more elegant fellow speakers. In fact, I am actually contributing to gender diversity today. I'm so happy about it. Anyway, let me set the stage by saying something. I think what is very pressing, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, is I think we need some kind of a roadmap, some kind of a GPS. In fact, I think precisely because much of Asia is in the stage of development. I think many countries, many companies, organizations are actually in the stage of transition So practically, many of us are lost within this maze of sustainability, policy adaptation, policy transformation. So I think if we are lost, I think that's okay. But I think it's very important for us to be lost in the right direction. I think providing the direction is important, and I hope, beyond just global initiative, like I know you come from Paris, Paris Agreement, that's actually the civilization saving document in modern times. So I think beyond all this global initiative, it's very important for us to regionalize the uniqueness, particularly for many of the countries. As I think this is the most pressing thing, to tailorize it for the region, because many of us have unique, circumstances, unique needs for certain stage of development, very differentiated trajectory into the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Low. So maybe we can go on. Okay. Yeah, you can maybe try to answer the question and then.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Leah, for setting up the context for our today's discussion. Before I answer your question, maybe I'd like to give you a brief introduction about me and my institution. I'm part of the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies at the ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute. It's a regional think tank covering strategic affairs across the region. So in 2020, we established the Climate Change in Southeast Asia program to really examine how Southeast Asian countries are moving towards their carbon green transition pathway, policy responses, and a lot of strategic issues surrounding ASEAN as a collective. So we embarked on a project starting from 2020. It's called the State of Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey Report. It's been a fascinating exercise. We've been doing it for the past 5 years. So based on my experience conducting that survey, I couldn't emphasize enough of how diverse our region is, particularly Southeast Asia. So actually just yesterday we launched the 2024 survey. So I just want to give you a sense of the questions we asked in the survey. So there is a question: to what extent do you think climate change impacts will negatively affect your life in 10 years' time? 60% of Southeast Asians express strong confidence that extreme weather events and climate impacts will personally affect them within the next decade. However, the sense of urgency varies across ASEAN countries. Citizens from nations most likely to experience direct impacts of climate disasters, such as the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, are more likely to hold this view. So I agree with Prof. Loh, who earlier said about diversity. Understand the context of our region is very important. And the second experience I like to highlight is that probably sometimes public perceptions does not always align with facts, likely due to insufficient knowledge about climate change issues. For example, in our survey, we asked respondents which countries or region they believe have demonstrated leadership in helping the world achieve Paris-aligned goals. Surprisingly, the majority named Japan as a climate leader. I don't know what's the perception, that the underlying reason that shaped this perception. But for those of us who follow climate negotiations quite closely, we realize that Japan among the G7 nations is probably the least ambitious in terms of their carbon neutrality target, their sustainability goals, and in fact, Japan is often criticized in our region for their insufficient efforts towards decarbonization. Japan also continues to invest in coal power plants, both domestically and abroad, particularly in our region, despite global pressure to shift away from coal. So that's probably my experience, my personal experience doing that survey. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this input. It's actually very interesting. only 60% think it will impact negatively.
Yeah.
I thought-
Anyone from the Philippines here? Anyone from the Philippines? Oh, Philippines is 90%.
Oh, wow.
98%.
Okay.
Singapore, I think I forgot, probably 40 or 50%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for this. And then we can move to Elizabeth. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Prof. Leah. And I would like to agree, of course, with what my two co-panelists have said. Diversity, but also I think the additional point I'd like to make is the fact that there is such diversity in approaches and views leads to coherence in the kind of legal standards that are in place domestically within countries and then between different countries in Southeast Asia. And I see that lack of coherence in formulating legal rules, both international law rules as well as domestic rules, and a lack of clarity as what that might mean for specific sectors as something that is actually maybe could be used to address the sustainability challenge in a much more powerful and impactful way. And if the legal and regulatory pathways can be much clearer, then that might increase the speed of transition as well as ambition.
Thank you so much. Thanks. So maybe we can follow up with a regional context. So how the region sustainability challenges that we just mentioned differ from those faced in other parts of the world? And are there unique opportunities and obstacles here? Maybe we can start again with Prof. Lo. Yeah.
Okay, I think this is not the default sequence, but I'm happy to speak. Yeah. I think if you look at what is happening now, particularly you mentioned the word regionalization, much of the impetus for climate change is actually driven at the global level. But right now, what we are seeing, actually, realistically speaking, is some kind of a bifurcation happening. In fact, I think in the Lee Kuan Yew School, we always speak about the East-West divide. I think there's no ideological divide in climate change, but I would say that right now, very distinctively, we are seeing a very clear north-south divide, the global north, the global south. The north is responsible for the climate. The south is blamed for the change. So in other words, what is going on? We need to inject a certain dose of realism. For example, maybe let me be a little bit specific. Say arising from many of the global initiatives in climate change, one of the very particular notion is, say, the concept of net zero. And the pure net zero in the strong form means that countries, companies will have to reduce their carbon footprint as much as possible until a point where they cannot abate anymore, then they do offset. But if you want to actually apply this in the Asian context, it means that no countries, no companies can actually do offsetting because we are still struggling to reach to the point where we cannot reduce any more than we can offset. So this imperative that comes from the thinking of the Paris Agreement, for example, and subsequent COPs, it is somewhat challenging to be applied in the Asian context, in the regional context. So I'm a little bit more accommodating. In fact, we should not be so exacting in our demands. And I think we should actually cater to some of the nuances that particularly in Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, particularly in Indonesia, some of the key challenges that we face day to day at a realistic level. Yep.
Very interesting, yeah. Okay. Can you add anything?
Yeah, probably another interesting takeaway from our survey is that Southeast Asians in our survey are still very concerned with the cost of climate transitions. So our survey shows that many Southeast Asians believe the biggest challenges to decarbonization are lack of R&D and technology, insufficient public and private sector support, and inadequate financial resources. Also, rising energy prices and the cost of living are the main concerns regarding the energy transition. And we also asked a question related to fossil fuel subsidies this year. Support for removal of fossil fuel subsidies surprisingly is very low in our region, as we know that fossil fuel subsidies distort the energy markets by making fossil fuels artificially cheap. So it's hard for the renewable, other alternative energy sources to take up in our region. But I one thing, cost issue is very specific to Southeast Asia. I think it's everywhere in the world, but yeah, I think it's becoming a discourse now in this region.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, one challenge that I would definitely see in Southeast Asia is the issue of just transition and the idea of realistically how sustainable development works within a Southeast Asia context. And then, of course, even more between Southeast Asian nations, each nation being so very different. And I don't think that's something that can be directly replicated from, I think, developments in other parts of the world. It probably needs to be developed in a way that's very unique to a particular national circumstance, and bearing in mind the different types of national energy transition plans, net zero transition plans within that particular country. And that involves, I think, a sort of like whole of society approach within that country that looks realistically at how to integrate, let's say, business and human rights related issues into different types of laws, looking at the content maybe of directors' duties with respect to how they govern their companies. And all of this is very, in a way, sort of domestic, even though influenced, I think, by legal developments and trends from around the world. And I see that as a challenge for Southeast Asian nations to try and adopt good practices from elsewhere within their own domestic legal systems.
Okay, very interesting. So maybe we can now move with the introduction. I mentioned 3 key topics that we will tackle today. And it was innovative government, strategic policymaking, and collaborative efforts. So maybe we can start now with governance. So my first question is going to be to Prof. Loh. Given your work on the Singapore Governance and Transparency Index and the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard, how do you see corporate governance evolving in the Asia-Pacific region to address sustainability challenges? And are companies in the region adequately integrating ESG principles into their core strategies?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Moderator. I think if you look at ESG and in particular, let us examine what is the fundamental role of governance. First of all, I think it's quite a mystery that when we speak about ESG, G is after E and S. Is it meant that it's an afterthought, it is last in the priority? It's not even alphabetical in order. So does that mean that it's less of importance? And I think if you look at ESG, what I see is that being put last is actually the final arbiter. It's actually the integrator, particularly to drive environment and society. In fact, if you use the analogy of a cart and horse, G is actually the cart pulling the horse of E and S. But I think having said that, I think recently what I've been doing in my research at my research center, the Center for Governance and Sustainability at NUS Business School is, of course, in business school, we always talk about money. I mean, that's our mainstay. I mean, no money, no business. So the key question is, what is the role of finance, money? What is the role of economy in ESG? And so very recently, just a couple of months ago, I written a Straits Times commentary. And in fact, I've been talking about that for quite some time, that actually ESG is not sufficient. We actually need to replace ESG with EESG. And the first E is actually economics. In other words, I mean, in econometric term, ESG is incomplete specification. You need to have a fuller specification to really synergize, to embed economic consideration squarely together with ESG. And I think this is precisely what happened. Maybe I'll quote one specific example very quickly. For example, recently, just a few months ago, together with my former master's student, I think Tricia Chong is here. Yeah, my master. We did a study on palm oil companies worldwide. And what we found, and actually to our surprise, is that the more sustainable the palm oil company is, the less is their financial valuation in the stock market. In other words, there's a valuation discount. And I think what is driving this puzzle is probably, I think investors have this own narrative that sometimes economic considerations supersede sustainability consideration as measured or indicated by ESG. So I think if we have a complete consideration, I think it's more in tune with some of the key driving forces. So in essence, what I'm saying is G must be the integrator, not only with environment and society, it must also integrate finance and economics to have EESG. And this is now some of the current thinking going on in what we call double materiality, financial impact considered together with impact materiality, which means impact on the environment, impact on society. Yep.
Amazing. I couldn't agree more. I think whenever we can add economics, I would be, I would agree with that. So for those who are not familiar or forgot ESG, it's environmental, social, and governance. And then what Prof. Flo is saying is that we should add economics, so it should be ESG. Okay, amazing. So maybe we can move on now, and my question would be to Ms. Melinda. So you recently co-authored a paper about how ASEAN countries have different strategies for advancing climate emission. And with that in mind, what have you learned about the various approaches to governance in the region?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I believe you're referring to my paper titled Examining Climate Ambition Enhancement in ASEAN Countries. So my colleagues and I at ICIS, we try to evaluate the NDC submissions of all 10 ASEAN countries from their first submission, I think in 2015 to 2016, to their most recent submissions in 2021 and 2022. I think some countries, they were experiencing some delay due to COVID-19. So we try to evaluate the progression instead of looking at the latest report, right? So according to our study, we categorize 10 ASEAN member states into 4. I think Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. If I may evaluate, these 3 countries have strengthened their economy-wide and sectoral targets. So they're the most progressive in terms of their articulation in their NDCs. So these 3 countries are very interesting, despite they're categorized as low-income countries, but in terms of progression, they are able to articulate more. And the third category is Brunei, Singapore, and Vietnam. They improve their economy-wide targets, but still have ambition gaps. The third category is Malaysia and the Philippines. They enhance economy-wide targets, but need clearer sector-scale implementation in terms of agriculture, forestry, energy transition, food security, and so on. And the last one is Indonesia and Thailand. They have limited updates on their articulation in terms of their carbon emission reductions, and they definitely need to do more in terms of their NDC. So that's probably our temporary finding now. We're looking forward to the next exercise. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then my last question on this governance topic to Ms. Elizabeth. Your work at the intersection of international climate law and corporate law. How do you see international economic law evolving to support the net zero transition in the Asia Pacific? Are there any particular legal governance challenges or opportunities that stand out?
Yeah, sure. So I think one area of international economic law which could be more progressive to address energy transition in Southeast Asia is international investment law. So this pertains to the issue of fossil fuel phase out in different countries. And international investment law is basically the study of investment treaties which allow foreign investors in a country to bring lawsuits against that country if the country takes regulatory actions or any other actions to affect the foreign investors' investments. Now the problem with international investment treaties is that they have traditionally been climate blind, which means they protect high carbon as well as low carbon emitting investments, which means all the coal-fired power plants, all the oil and gas investments are all protected within these treaties. So there's a disjunct between international investment law and the field of international environmental law, where international environmental law, you have very uncontroversial principles like the polluters pays principle, right, where the polluter is the one that should be taking on the burden. But in international investment law, actually, it's sort of flipped, because even if the state takes regulatory actions to meet its Paris Agreement targets, foreign investors can sue the state because that interferes with its foreign investment. And the problem in ASEAN is that about 80% of ASEAN investment treaties are based on an old generation of investment treaties, which still allows for climate-blind investment protection. So ASEAN Secretariat actually released a report on this at the end of the last year, setting out the extent of this problem for investment treaties, which means that in, say, if I may, Indonesia, when you look at Indonesia and the Just Energy Transition Partnership and I think National Energy Transition Plans, there's an overlying issue of international investment law, which might actually restrain government's regulatory space. And this is something which I think has maybe not been so broadly explored and should be utilized to impact on energy transition, because investment treaties can also be quite a powerful tool to promote clean energy investments. It's just a matter of what is the provisions of the investment treaty. You could have provisions which have investment facilitation, so encouragement of low carbon investments. You could have other types of sustainable development provisions within the treaties requiring foreign investors to abide by certain types of environmental, anti-corruption, labor standards. And all of those, I think, are underutilized at present in ASEAN relevant treaties.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think we're closing the governance topic. This couldn't be more relevant for the LKY school. But let's move now to the second topic, which is strategic policymaking. And I'm going to ask my first question to Melinda. As urbanization accelerates in the Asia-Pacific, what strategic policies should be prioritized to ensure that smart city initiatives contribute positively to sustainability goals? And also, how can policymakers balance the need for rapid development with long-term environmental considerations?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I think a lot of us in the development sector, we are very familiar with the concept of, I think it emerges quite recently because we're experiencing multiple crises in the past 5 years. Supply chain disruption, COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and so on. So there is a concept called leveraging crisis, crisis as a leverage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's very popular now, I think, in Southeast Asia. So for just to give you an example, here in Singapore, remember when we experienced COVID-19, right? We experienced supply chain disruption where food supply chain was disrupted from Malaysia. Mm-hmm. So at that time, governments, they are very quickly in responding to that by trying to introduce more like policies to improve domestic food production, which is very interesting because usually you are an urbanist as well, Leah. I think urban centers, they are meant to be built for high yield economic activities, industries, businesses, services. But because of this crisis, the perception changed a little bit. Now urban centers, at least need to have a proportion of the land to be built for food production, which is it's a low yield economic activity. But it is still necessary for providing a cushion should crisis like COVID-19 happens again in the future. And then also another experience from, I think, a lot of major cities in Southeast Asia, my hometown, Jakarta, Bangkok. In the past few years, I think a lot of property developers, governments, they are very open with the concept of nature-based solution for greening the urban landscape. Because, today's energy price is very high. So if we depend so much on air conditioner to provide cooling for our urban center, that's not sustainable. So they are more open now with the low-cost solutions like natural-based solutions. So that's probably the concept of leveraging crisis.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. And my next question would be to Elizabeth. So moving from cities to the broader region, how do you see legal frameworks influencing strategic policymaking in the Asia Pacific? And what challenges or developments in law could significantly impact the region's ability to meet its sustainability goals?
So I think first I'd like to maybe challenge the question a little bit. I don't think it's legal frameworks that affect strategic policy making. I think it's the other way around. Strategic policy making sets out parameters, and then legal frameworks follow from that, right? So it is, and then I guess to the question itself, I guess one area which would be really helpful to have, I think, strategic policy making that sets legal direction is in the area of business and human rights and the intersection between that. So there is probably at present a lack of clarity as to how human rights and sustainable development principles translate in a business context. Like, what does it exactly mean for a business to have to do due diligence on its suppliers, due diligence on the impacts of its corporate activities on various affected communities? Like, what are the types of practical steps that need to be taken, as well as what constitutes a reasonable type of due diligence? So I think all of that is a current lack of clarity, and it would be very helpful, I think, if there was some direction there. Another area, so it's not just corporate due diligence and corporate business human rights, but investors. So ESG investing, what does that exactly entail? If if investor wants to say that they are doing ESG investing in a way that is friendly to business and human rights, what does that exactly mean? Do they have to do their own due diligence on their portfolio companies? Do they have to do on-the-ground assessments in high-risk industries and geographies? Do they have to engage with governments to input on ESG regulation? Are they supposed to be engaging in shareholder pressure to pressure their companies in terms by making climate-relevant shareholder resolutions? So I think all of these is still like an open question which needs to be shaped, and it would be helpful if there is a direction there from a strategic and a legal level.
Perfect. Thank you. My last question regarding strategic policymaking is for Prof. Loh. So here goes my question. How can policymakers ensure that business integrity and ethical leadership are central to sustainability policies in the region? And what role do you think policy incentives play in encouraging companies to adopt and maintain high ethical standards?
Wow, this is a very tough question. I mean, if you speak about business integrity, and sometimes we see this as an oxymoron. I mean, can business and integrity slip together, coexist? But having said that, I think if you look at sustainability, ESG, I think a common question is where does ethics places itself? Which part of ESG is it in? And by any conventions right now, in terms of norms, it is actually part within governance G. But having said that, I think it's usually the missing part, the missing element in the entire G pillar. And I think it really has got to do with this tension, the tension between doing the right things versus doing the things right. Maybe some specific examples, again, to illustrate my point, maybe to two companies. Let's say if you consider the case of Tesla. I mean, I don't know how many of you drive EVs, electric vehicles. Tesla is, of course, one of the pioneers, and they have a very eccentric leader, Elon Musk, who occasionally come out in the news in the recent 1-2 days, uttering some nonsense about Democrats and assassination. So I think if you look at Tesla, I mean, it's definitely doing the right thing. I mean, and EV is definitely right for sustainability, protect the environment, make us switch to renewable, and we have zero pollution, zero carbon footprint. But if you look at how Elon Musk in Tesla is doing all the things, he's probably doing all the right things wrongly I mean, this is one person that does not believe he needs a board of directors. Yeah, so then if you look at another example, a countervailing example, you look at big oil company, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, BP, or maybe Total Energies. I always have to quote French example. Okay, all of us probably have maybe bias against fossil fuel. So technically, they are doing all the wrong things. But if you, very, very oddly, if you look at how many of the big oil companies are run, their governance standards as measured by any framework, by any assessment is actually tip-top. In fact, the irony is many of the big oil companies make it into the ESG rating indices rather than, say, EV company. So I think we really need to do the balancing now. In fact, I would say that all businesses, all organizations must take care of the two right, doing the right things in the right way, not just do the things right, which is, or doing the right thing wrong, or doing rightly the wrong thing. These two are two sides of the same coin. In fact, what we do now in many of the assessment is comply or explain. I don't know how you comply or explain in terms of ethics. I think in terms of ethics, we should not be comply or explain. It's comply or exterminate. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we're closing this strategic policy making topic with an amazing sentence that I wrote down, and then I'm gonna say again the difference between doing the right things and doing the things right. I love that. Thank you so much, Prof. Lo. And let's move on now to the third topic, which is collaborative efforts. And my first question on this topic would be to Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, with your focus on climate-related legal risks, how can countries in the Asia-Pacific collaborate more effectively on legal frameworks that address shared environmental challenges?
So I think it's actually quite a tough question to answer because there hasn't always been such close collaboration between countries in the region. I think maybe one good example of a collaborative effort is the ASEAN Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, which is in its third iteration within, I think, a short span of about 3 to 4 years. And so it's been, I guess you could say, relatively successful in setting out like a baseline that different ASEAN countries can measure themselves against, because then you have the ASEAN taxonomy and then you have national taxonomies, but at least the ASEAN taxonomy is a base reference. So I think that's probably one example of a good collaborative effort. I think in terms of challenges as to where collaboration is needed, definitely in terms of fossil fuel phase out. I had previously mentioned about international investment treaties collaboration, and that one is important to have ASEAN-wide collaboration because a lot of these treaties are multilateral treaties. So you have ASEAN as a block treaties with non-ASEAN partners, you have treaties within ASEAN states, and then you have treaties which are between just one ASEAN state and a non-ASEAN state. And all of these form overlapping treaty obligations, which a ASEAN state will have to foreign investors, which could all affect the national energy transition plans of that ASEAN state. So there's a lot of coordination between ASEAN states that's necessary, I think, to form a coherent approach to deal with this problem. And that influences the flow of financing into different ASEAN states. So I would maybe, if I could urge, I guess, there's so much focus on sustainable finance, which is very good. There's so much focus on coal phase-out plans and everything, but I wonder whether they could look a bit more at these international legal structures and international environmental law and see whether all of these can be more coherent as a whole.
Thank you so much. My second question would be to Melinda. ASEAN countries have diverse environmental and developmental context. How can collaborative efforts be strengthened among ASEAN member states to create more coherent and unified policies on sustainability?
Yeah, I do agree with you, Leah, that ASEAN countries have their own development context, right? But as a researcher covering ASEAN, I still believe that ASEAN's convening power as a regional institution that collaborate across different sectors, energy, finance, human rights, trade, economy, and so on, it's still very much underutilized until today. Just to add what Elizabeth mentioned earlier, I think a lot of developments have been made in the financial sector, but actually the energy sector is becoming very vibrant as well. I'll give you an excellent proof that actually ASEAN can do more together. So in 25, the ASEAN Energy Minister meeting agreed to set up a target to reduce energy intensity. They came up with a number, 20% in reduction in 2020. But remarkably, this target was actually achieved in 2018. So by just putting like number and target, clear number and target like collaboratively together, it actually can be a political signal for ASEAN to move forward together. Just a simple initiative like that can actually be replicated across different sectors, I believe.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then my last question would be for Prof. Loh. Given your experience in governance and sustainability, how can we foster stronger collaboration between the private sector, governments, and civil society in the Asia-Pacific? And what are the key factors that determine the success of these cross-sector partnerships in driving sustainability?
Thank you, Leah. You have government sector, private sector, civil society. I think even if you look on stage at this panel, it's collaboration between three sectors. Leah, you're from Lee Kuan Yew School, government sector. I'm from business school, private sector. Melina and Elizabeth, you are from the civil society. So I think we actually practice what we preach. So having said that, I think what is the most crucial factor for the three parties, the three sectors to come together, and I think it's the commonality of purpose, that the consensus of what we want to achieve, because many of us are pulling in different directions. The private sector usually is profit-driven money. The private sector, the public sector will be on good public provision, and of course civil society will have certain ideals that they push. So I think we need a certain kind of convergence, perhaps a new consensus, particularly within the context of sustainability. So within businesses, we are always practicing materialism, and I think it's very important to imbue what in sustainability we say the core important factor, which is materiality. So it's a synthesis of materialism with sustainable materiality. And I think that this is where we need to put the money in the right place. And I'll just say that by the three coming together, I think we make sure that the color of money is green. Literally, yeah, color of money is green, yes.
Love that. Okay, thank you, Prof. Loh. Thank you, the three of you, for this very interesting talks. And maybe now we can open the floor to questions from the audience. So whoever has a question for the three experts here, now we can take them.
Oh, Ben, yeah.
Yes. No, I think someone is coming with a mic.
Yes.
I don't have to move. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful panel, and I think it reinforces all the dynamic ways in which this part of the world is really thinking about these questions in a systematic way. And of course, yet the problem is we're still addressing this fundamental problem of this 1.5, 2 degrees objective, which is scaring a lot of people. And the, we know from the IPCC, we've already gone over 1.1, 1.5, looks like we're going to go over that. So I'm curious about then the innovations you can think of collaboratively that might actually help think about that actual objective. And I think you're quite right that no one approach by itself can do it. In that context, Elizabeth, I got a question for you. We've been thinking at IES, or the Institute for Environment Sustainability at our school here, about what are the things we haven't been doing yet that might be a lever for accelerating action. And we're working on a number of projects on decarbonization technology and so on. But out of those conversations came an idea I wouldn't mind putting by you in terms of the investment side. So right now on the ESG side and company competitiveness, we have this challenge where China is producing really low-cost EVs and solar panels and providing a service to the world through competitive engagement, right? But the problem is the North says, oh, we didn't mean that, right? They would focus on coal-fired power plants instead, and they're engaging in therefore protectionist policies to undermine clean tech, and it's creating this kind of paradox, right? And I'm wondering how we get around that paradox. And you're mentioning the investment side of things. Have you guys looked at all into the idea of going to either WTO for like a free trade and clean tech agreement, for example, or even ISO as a way of creating standards around clean tech so that CBAMs couldn't touch them? Have you thought about those, trade dynamics as part of that conversation?
Yeah, so I think definitely trade is a subset of international economic law. So in my capacity as client of, we have not yet looked so closely at that in the context of Asia. I guess personally, in terms of my research affiliations with APSEL as well as CIL, I do look at that, but I think this is not going to really answer your question, I'm sorry, but I think for trade, it is very difficult because the WTO process is quite, let's say it's very slow. Very little happens. The rules the trade rules under the WTO system are not focused on sustainable development, even though they say they are. So, for example, you look at a comparison between different like products, but you don't actually look at the environmental or social impacts of the products itself in the particular trade rules. So, systemically, there is an issue with the way the trade laws are, and I'm not entirely confident that that would be the best mechanism to achieve, I think, what you are trying to articulate, Ben. And I also note that the WTO has had certain sustainable development initiatives so far. They've also been trying to encourage, I think, green technology. There's also, I think, the issue of intellectual property protection. So all of that, those are initiatives, but still very, very slow. Like, in a way, my personal interest in international investment law over international trade law is, I think, because I feel that international investment might potentially be an area of easier reform than international trade. Because if with international trade, there have been so many different negotiating rounds, but really there has been very little progress. I'm not sure whether that is necessarily the lever. Another lever maybe might be climate litigation risk. And I say this with a bit of caution because the NGO that I am with, Client Earth, is very aggressively litigating in Europe and US, but in Asia, the policy is actually to engage and do legal capacity building with governments and various judiciaries in Asia. And I think in terms of legal risk, maybe that is a lever that can be considered. So not litigation, but the fact that when companies need to think about legal risk, it is a heightened awareness that the factual basis of the way their companies and businesses work is changing. So the obligations to respond to that need to be higher. And these are not just domestic corporate law obligations, but now because you have international tribunals like the International Court of Justice, the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, that are talking about basic science-based standards and the reality of climate change and the fact that countries also have an obligation to respond to climate change. That means that if countries have an obligation to respond, countries will have an obligation to potentially make certain types of regulatory changes, and all of that heightens the regulatory and legal risk for businesses. So maybe that's like a more diffuse sort of lever in terms of advocacy, which might scare people to move faster, to put it bluntly. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's not a complete answer, but sort of, maybe.
I have another, yes, thank you. there's.
I need to move.
Oh no.
Very much. Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm a visiting fellow from RSIS. I have two questions. The first one is for Professor Ho. You have mentioned ESG. Yeah, that is economy considered ESG or financial impact ESG. And we know Singapore has been always maintaining its economic position in ASEAN. So my question is, what actions or measures or strategic policies has Singapore government adopted to utilize this advantage to support ESG in ASEAN? And my second question is for any distinguished expert there. That is, since we have faced many sustainable challenges for our society moving forward, how the emerging technologies can be used to address part of the challenges. If you could elaborate this point with particular cases, that would be highly appreciated. Thank you for your thought-provoking talks. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the question on ESG, economics, environment, social, and governance. And I think on the role of Singapore in ASEAN, I think, first of all, from a policy perspective, probably I have to defer to Lee Kuan Yew School. But let me speak from more from a finance and business perspective, and the role of Singapore in terms of driving the green revolution within the context of ASEAN. You probably know that Singapore all along has been maintaining as a business hub, as a financial center. And I think that this is literally very, very important that Singapore can use this point of leverage to influence I would say finance behavior, business behavior in the region. For example, in the realm of finance, Singapore has been a very, very strong promulgator of green finance, or even now what we call transition finance, which is helping and transition finance. That means helping organizations, helping countries to embark on the journey of being more sustainable. So in other words, you help not only the people or the companies that are already sustainable, because actually this is a paradox. Often banks are giving loans, sustainability loans, to companies that are already sustainable. But now I think the thinking has shifted, and I think this is pioneered by Singapore, that you give loans, financing to companies that are not sustainable, but help them onto the journey. So I think Singapore can provide that guidance in the region, not only in ASEAN, but also in Asia, to look at how particularly Asia can make the decision. And of course, within the overall business, I think not only finance is actually a very wonderful platform to launch broader sustainability within all business spheres. So I think in that instance, Singapore can help. Maybe just end with one specific example again. Earlier on, I mentioned about palm oil companies, and I think I'm quite surprised by the results. So that sustainable palm oil companies often lose their market valuation. So actually, I was engaging in dialogue with many businesses, and then with some Indonesian as well. So, when I say, palm oil company need to be sustainable, because investors are not providing that valuation. And in one occasion, some of the audience asked me, by the way, in the palm oil companies of Indonesia, where are the investors coming from? They are all listed on the Singapore Exchange. I was totally dumbfounded, and so I think Singapore has a role, precisely because we have the financial capital to mobilize and galvanize the right direction. Yeah.
I think there is a question here.
Second question.
Yeah.
For who? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can take that one there. Regarding technology, I think most of us here understand that we are not lacking of technology, right? In fact, the cost of producing renewable energy is falling drastically, and it's becoming cost competitive compared to conventional energy. But the problem is always political economy. Elizabeth mentioned earlier about Just Energy Transition Partnership. Just to give you an illustration, in my home country, Indonesia, more than 50% of energy supply is still generated from coal power plants. And our coal power plants are still relatively young. So unlike developed countries where they can transition quite smoothly because they have utilized the life cycle of their coal power plants and they can move faster to renewable energy, we're still very young and we really need to utilize this asset. So the question about justice, about political economy is becoming so much pronounced now in Southeast Asia, and we need to pay attention more into that. Even though we receive a lot of financial assistance from developed countries, I don't think it's enough to push them to do more as of today. Yeah.
Thank you. Zainal here. Mine is related to the first question about role of Singapore and also economics. But my question is beyond economics, if I may say, in the context of political economics, and in particular, Indonesia. So it's not just the obvious question about economic capacity, economic leadership that Singapore can provide, but Indonesia is the largest ASEAN country with the kind of population, with the kind of geography that really says a lot about its potential. So how do you see the role of Indonesia on its own, for Indonesia, and Indonesia in the context of leadership in ASEAN on issues which you're talking about? Thank you.
Okay, maybe we collect another question first.
Right, yeah.
So maybe you can go one first, and then we can have another question. Yes.
Yeah, actually, I talked about the role of Indonesia recently in a climate conference at ISIS. So, a country like Indonesia is becoming a spotlight in climate negotiations, right? It is considered middle-income countries, which still needs financial support from developed countries. At the same time, its carbon emission profile is rising, right? So actually, in a lot of climate negotiations, a lot of developed countries also point out to this trend that really demands Indonesia to do more rather than blaming developed countries to provide to do more or to provide assistance. So. I see there are three strategies that Indonesia try to do in terms of their climate diplomacy. I think the first one is becoming a vocal advocate for the global South in terms of climate negotiations. Indonesia several times raised the issue of developed countries not meeting their climate finance pledge. And then also, it is also very active in the discussion of loss and damage fund with the Philippines, which demand, again, developed countries to provide support for those countries vulnerable to climate disasters. That's the roles in COP. And the second one is, I think, in terms of finance, couple years ago, 2 years ago, when Indonesia became the chair of G20, actually, a lot of discussion emerged surrounding the financial access. So Indonesia often pointed out that multilateral organizations like IMF and World Bank, they are very outdated. They have a lot of stringent rules, bureaucracy, and then they really hamper access for developed countries to access financial needs. So a lot of time Indonesia raised this issue during its presidency in COP20. That's what it's trying to do. And the third strategy I see very, very unique is Indonesia is trying to align its climate ambition with its growth potential. The conversation surrounding nickel production for supplying production feeding into battery, EV battery, and so on. So Indonesia is trying to look at how to leverage this climate transition to benefit, to balance with its own growth. I think it's been very successful so far. It received a lot of assistance from RED, the Forestry Finance, Just Energy Transition Partnership provided by G7 countries, and then also, I think the Asia Net Zero Commission provided by Japan. So in terms of articulating its climate diplomacy, I think a lot of progress have been done, and it's interesting to see what's the progression in the future.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I add something, but before I answer, I have to make a disclosure as well. While serving in NUS as a professor, I'm at the same time adjunct professor at Universitas Airlangga. That is in Surabaya, which is the eastern side of Java. And I think in my many interactions with Indonesian businesses and also policymakers, I think Indonesia can actually offer a very good lesson in the management of, I would say, macro sustainability. I mean, many examples. So let's say, for example, in one of the key things, the movement of the capital, for example. I think in the audience, many of us know for the right or wrong reason, 40% of Jakarta is below sea level and is sinking by about a few centimeters per year. So by the year 2050, literally the whole Jakarta may be below sea level if we go on this trajectory. So I think this lesson about I'll say relocation of a big capital to Nusantara, which is on the eastern side of Kalimantan. I think it offers a lot of lessons. First, in some of the social transformation, how do you mobilize human capital to move there in terms of making the working conditions right in a new locality, which is literally in the middle of the jungles. And how to then, when you reach there, how do you manage the environmental aspects of conservation, preservation, beyond just building a sanctuary? I mean, I respect that very much. I mean, I was told there was a very beautiful sanctuary for orangutan, so which is, I think I really commend this effort. Before they even build anything first, they make sure that the species are protected before human intervention occur. Yeah, so and then the other issue would be in terms of interaction with the indigenous people and their, I'll say, localized economy. So I think the world can watch Indonesia, not just Singapore, to see how eventually, if you read this lesson large enough, eventually in many parts of the world, we have to decentralize our economic activity. Many parts of what we are doing have to move away from urban areas. How do you actually facilitate, foster this movement of economic activity to remote locations so as to equalize our footprint? For example, many of you will know, the carbon footprint of urban people is usually about 10 times that of rural people. 10 times, it's a factor of 10 times. And what is causing our challenge in climate change now is actually one factor, urbanization. So we need to de-urbanize. I think that it would be the short therapy that will immediately bring the carbon footprint now. So I think if we watch Indonesia in terms of the successful movement, which is probably not in the next few months, I think it will probably take a few years or even a few decades for the successful movement. I think that the world can watch how this journey takes place, and as a side lesson, this would be a lesson for us to really distribute our economic activities to lower the carbon footprint for the world. Yeah.
Maybe I just add very quickly one other aspect about something that's happening in Indonesia, which is I think the Indonesian Supreme Court has one of the most progressive training programs for its judges on environmental and climate adjudication. It's been running domestic training for its judges for the past 5 to 6 years, and last year and again this year, we'll be doing regional judicial training for participants from around the Asia region on environmental and climate adjudication. So that is a way in which I think there is leadership there that's being shown.
Thank you so much. I think we have another question. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'm just wondering, do you have any expectation for COP29? And what are your views on green hydrogen and nuclear technology? Thank you.
Okay.
Who wants to go first?
Okay, maybe I go first. I think just to recap, COP29 will be end of this year. It will be held in Baku, Azerbaijan. I think as a starter, I'm not sure how they will discuss global warming when it's freezing cold in Baku. I really can't know. But having said that, I think the agenda is now on low carbon alternative, in particular hydrogen. And right now, at least from the business sense, nowhere are we reaching commercial viability for hydrogen, not only in terms of generation, but more importantly in terms of the full infrastructure that's needed for the utilization of hydrogen. So I think the only way hydrogen energy could be effectively used is actually a policy intervention, upfront investment in, I would say, even it's actually a public good. Without that governmental, I would say, kickstart, it will never occur because hydrogen in itself is quite complex. There are many ways to extract hydrogen. Of course, in simple terms, you just need to separate the two atoms of hydrogen from one atom of oxygen in water, electrolysis. But the problem is that we are still relying on fossil fuel energy to do the electrolytic process. So I think it's not only hydrogen, the infrastructure and the policy must immediately go into green hydrogen. Otherwise, we'll still be back at square one. And I think this is actually the greatest challenge. I hope in Baku or in subsequent or parallel meetings, we can address the challenge. Perhaps, I think maybe the solution should be even supranational rather than national. Yeah. Oh, UK, yeah. Oh, nuclear is another low. Am I allowed to say?
Yes, of course.
Okay, I'm not a nuclear physicist, but with limited policy knowledge, I think that is something that's, I would say, has very good potential now, especially in terms of economics. And right now, the trend is for miniaturization of nuclear energy as a low carbon alternative. It's actually not too much investment. I mean, from economic viewpoint, all you need is about 7 hectares. I think Bukit Timah campus here is just about the right size for a small modular reactor. This is the SMR. This campus here is just right in terms of size. Yeah. So I think SMR offer a lot of real alternative that would be commercially viable, and I think Singapore cannot miss this boat. I think we need to build our capability. By the way, I think the audience probably know next to the business school on the main campus is our NUS Center for Nuclear Research and Safety, where it's just part next to the business school. I don't know why. Maybe economics is very important.
You can go.
Hi, I'm Dennis. I work for a social enterprise called Plastic Bank, and I come from the Philippines. And as you might know, the Philippines has a very aggressive EPR law, where 900 companies last year, 900 large companies followed suit for the EPR plastic recovery system. So my question is, what do you think the trajectory of sustainability law in Asia Pacific? Because we all know that there's the chicken and egg between compliance and voluntarism, right? And we know how sustainable law is quite aggressive now in the West. So do you see any trends or aggressive trajectory for compliance law in Asia Pacific?
Maybe, yep.
Maybe, okay, I'll start and then they can fill in for me. Okay, so I guess actually when you say sustainability law, I actually view different areas of law as being all sustainability related. right? So for example, you can have like disclosure requirements for listed companies, right? And then you have different standards across Southeast Asia in terms of the level of disclosure. Some countries are more progressive. They are wanting listed companies to disclose and wanting SMEs to also disclose. Others are perhaps a bit further behind. So those are, and the type of disclosures and the nature of disclosures then gives rise to potential greenwashing related issues. And then there are also other types of regulations which may develop to address greenwashing issues. So those are like on the sort of disclosure aspect of it. And then you have corporate law, which governs like the way that directors run their companies. And then that's where you have different types of obligations. You have all these shareholder lawsuits against directors in the West. And so that's another area of law. And then yet another area of law is like climate framework laws. So climate framework laws in certain countries, for example, Malaysia is looking at potentially a climate framework law, which will coordinate the different areas within that particular country relating to sustainability, which can be as broad as net zero transition, sustainable finance, climate finance, and even carbon credits, carbon taxes, right? So I'm not entirely sure whether you can, to answer your question about sustainability law specifically, I don't think you can expect that all these different areas of law will be very robust and progressive. I think potentially you might have like quite fast developments in one area, but other areas might lag. And I see this as a domestic coordination problem amongst different areas of laws. So I guess maybe if you look at climate framework laws, which would ideally set the tone for and coordinate between other areas of law within a country, that would be aspirationally one area where if you have very robust climate framework laws, then everything else might fall into neater categories. And it will also make a country's obligations, Paris Agreement-wise, become binding legal obligations within that country, which would be helpful also, I think, in terms of like pushing ambition within the country.
Yep. Okay, maybe if you allow me to answer.
Of course.
You mentioned one of the very, I would say, emotional word, plastic. Plastic, I mean, I think if you look at this plastic, I think we have to be quite circumspect in how we use. Maybe two specific examples: plastic straw, metal straw, plastic bag versus cotton bag. I think we need to be quite calibrated. For example, let's say plastic straw versus metal straw. How many times do you actually need to use the metal straw to equalize the carbon footprint of metal straw? There are many research that most research will point to about 150 times. So for example, if you use one plastic straw once every 2 days, you have to carry the metal straw for 1 whole year to equalize. And would you do that everywhere you go for 1 year? And I think no need for the environmental part. From some news report that I see from the social part, there are many people who carry the metal straw in their pockets. They fell down. The metal straw actually injured their body with some fatalities. I mean, it's very, very sad. I think for the environment, there was some, I would say, loss of lives. And so the other example is plastic bag versus, say, organic cotton bag. This is even more terrible. Studies have shown if you use one plastic bag every day, and then you take an organic cotton bag, how many times do you need to use the plastic bag? Studies have shown you need to use the cotton bag for 55 years.
What?
You need to carry the cotton bag for one whole lifetime for you to equalize the plastic. So I think when we talk about the plastic revolution, I'm so amazed about this zero plastic thing. And all of us know zero plastic, there are many types, 7 types of plastics. 2 types are quite recyclable, PET and HDPE, because they melt at lower temperature. So I think what is more important is perhaps to set up a good infrastructure for us to recycle plastic in terms of compliance, in terms of law, so that we don't have to waste a lot of metals and cotton. And I go around speaking. Do you know how many metal bottles I have in my office? They give me a metal bottle after every speech. I have one whole shelf of metal bottles because they don't serve plastic bottle. So I actually quite sad. One day I actually told the organization that invited me quite often, please don't give me a metal bottle for this round. And then they actually say we planted 100 trees in your name in Indonesia for this round. So I was very happy. Up to today, I don't know where the trees are.
Thank you so much for the answers. Do we have another question from the audience? Oh, yes, sorry, I didn't see you, yeah.
Hi, my name is Beatrice. I work at ICE here in the LKY School of Public Policy. So I guess one question that I wanted to ask you in reflection to what you've been talking about. So just to rewind, Melinda acknowledged that there is a misperception within the public of ASEAN regarding how countries should decarbonize, what is our progress with decarbonization. But I am curious if there is a misalignment between policymakers and researchers and the sustainability challenges, particularly in conflating different challenges with one another. So just to give you a brief perspective on this, in the most recent Asia-Pacific SDG progress report created by the United Nations Commission in Asia-Pacific, they have the different SDGs and their progress towards 2030. All of them don't look very favorable, but the outstanding one is that one of the most progressive SDGs is clean energy. But the one that is actually in the red or actually going backwards is climate action. So it's a bit of a confusing affair, since in Southeast Asia, a lot of what we look at if we think about sustainability challenges is decarbonization and moving towards clean energy. But the data shows that clean energy is actually moving forward, but climate action is not. So I wanted to know your insights on this. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Beatrice, I do agree with you that in some areas, we are making progress, but in some areas we are not making any progress. So that's probably shaping different perceptions on various climate actions in the public. But from my experience conducting the survey, yes, I think the science communication is definitely needed in this region, and we really need to provide the right information to the public so their perception can be changed over time. So that's probably my takeaway from this experience.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you, and I also agree with the need that there needs to be much more communication between researchers, policymakers, and also potentially civil society. Right, so there are a lot of gaps that need to be plugged. I think capacity building events, just like almost this one, right, is a great way to start. And I guess it would be good to see that if there's really solid and important research that's being translated immediately into policy, like if that gap can be closed, it would probably be very powerful. Maybe we can ask Ben for his thoughts on how that could be done. Yeah.
I actually have a question, so I'm not going to answer your question. And it's, of course, great and as the heart of eyes. But Melinda, I wanted to come back and be a bit provocative on your response to Beatrice around climate communication as being a causal force in changing perceptions and understandings. So we at eyes do work on causality a lot, and how do you do something to cause an outcome. And that is the traditional hypothesis, that communication leads to changes in how we see the world. But the empirical evidence is not consistent with that hypothesis. In fact, Yale has a 20-year funded project, where I was last, on climate communications. The hypothesis was that this project would help change Americans' attitudes towards climate change. It did not happen. There was no causality, but it got a lot of research presented. It did a lot of wonderful things, but it didn't have the effect at all that they expected. So I'm wondering why you think that communication would do that, or do you think perhaps, and this is our favorite word, as a policy mix might be a more effective option, where it's part of a broader set of tools that together might do something that by itself could not. And I wouldn't mind your thoughts on that. I know it's kind of provocative, but I wouldn't mind your thoughts on the expectation of communication itself changing perceptions.
Maybe Elizabeth can add later because she works on advocacy more than me. So I think now, in fact, like the rise of social media can be a bridge, right, for science communication and so on. So just to give you some snapshots from our survey respondents depend more on social media and influencer rather than communication with parents or friends regarding climate change, how they receive information about climate change. So it's very Southeast Asia, I think. It's very, very, very relevant for our region. But in terms of communicating the findings, the scientific findings on climate change, I think you need to be very specific with the target group that you want to influence. So if your target group is policymakers, earlier we had this conversation with Prof. Ro mentioned that policymakers, they won't go into regression charts. Definitely they won't go beyond pie charts or bar charts. And then also with advocacy groups, right? If you want to use your communication for advocacy, definitely you need to be very, very direct and very provocative as well. So I think be very specific with your target group. It's very important.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with all of that except the provocative bit, because I think that, so far from my experience in advocacy, actually it's maybe more helpful to not be so provocative because I guess from the decline of model in Asia is to focus on impactful engagements, and that can be very targeted engagements with regulators, with, I think we are keen in creating impact, and sometimes as distinct from other types of advocacy groups, we don't want to just make noise for the sake of making noise, because I think that hurts your credibility. So we do a lot of work with, let's say, technical experts, external legal experts, so that we almost function like, hopefully, a bit more like a think tank, so that we have communications that's valuable, while at the same time also providing, I guess, more grassroots perspectives. And I guess my aspiration maybe would be that would be something that regulators would be more open to in terms of a free communication. Maybe that would be a helpful bridge between like purely research and academia, and then like purely policymakers, and then there's the industry in between, which includes sometimes civil society activities as well.
I think we can take one more question.
Thank you, panelists, for this robust discussion. My name is Kawi. I'm from Asian Banking School. We are providers, private institution providing capacity building for mainly financial institutions, bankers. I'd like to draw the discussion to one of the largest emitter as well as producers of carbon, as well as renewable energy. I think we sort of missed that discussion on China. I know Ben, in his earlier question, did ask something about the overcapacity problems between China and the EU or US. China has been building nuclear power plants, I think twice or thrice the numbers of the world combined, as well as putting a lot of solar and wind turbines across countries and trying to do that across the world, as well as EV itself. Now, what would be some of the challenges that China would face in the near future with their transitions, which, quite similar to what Indonesia is facing or other parts of developing ASEAN is facing as well. So that is one question. The second one would be if they sort of open up the technology and the policy that they have been doing internally, domestically, would they have an impact to ASEAN or Asia in general? I was asking this question because we could probably see that last 10 years or 15 years, China has leapfrogged in terms of technology transformations for themselves, and now they are sort of exporting all this out. In terms of the push for clean tech or green tech, It has been mainly just solar 10 years ago, but it was an overcapacity problem as well. And now EV is an overcapacity problem, according to the rhetoric that is coming out from a lot of the media. So back to social media and all that stuff, how would that transform as well, if this China ginormous way of working start to export out, thinking the policy and the financing. We have just sent across a group of bankers to Beijing just about 3 months ago. They came back and say that, it's completely different, the way they think, the way they talked, and the way they have implemented their green policy. And they also seen some of the technology that's evolving from the cloud of Alibaba and the rest of the BYD. So if I could get some insights, if there's, of the panelists. Thank you so much.
Who wants to answer the question?
Okay.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, maybe let me start first. Okay, I think if you look at the issue of China, I think first of all, let's put the issue in perspective first, and then I'll offer some solution. I think in the world now, probably we have been pointing a lot of fingers on China because factually, statistically, let's say in terms of specific coal generation, coal which is solid fossil fuel, they are by far number one in the world. No one can touch them in terms of the amount of carbon footprint, carbon emission due to the generation of energy using coal. China is number one, India is number two. But I think if you want to really look at the full situation, if you adjust this carbon footprint, number one by per capita, just for population, number two across time. So if you look at cumulative carbon emission over time, let's say pre-industrial time, which is nominally, we always start at the year 1850. I mean, that is usually when we say Paris Agreement, pre-industrial time, notionally we put it 1850. If you take the cumulative emission adjusted per capita, China and India will be the very, very bottom of the totem pole in terms of all the significant countries. Gas-rich country will be the number one and number two, Canada and USA. Yeah, so I think right now what is happening is we have been, attaching a lot of blame on China without understanding the trajectory of history. But I think what is important now is perhaps the world should come together, co-solve the problem together with China rather than to say us versus them. Because right now the conventional thinking is China is the problem and also the solution. It should solve its own problem, which I think may not be realistic. So I think the world, not only China, but Asia in general, we should actually, what we, in the conference of the parties meeting, say a couple of years ago in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, we came up with the concept of burden sharing. So burden sharing would be the foot forward to solve many of the problems in Asia. And I think particularly because if you look at China, why is it that they have so much carbon footprint? It's because they are still the most significant supply chain to the world. So if they are emitting carbon, they are actually not emitting for themselves. They are actually emitting it for the world. So all the more the world should come together to solve the problem together with countries in Asia, not only China, not India, I think Indonesia in particular too will need to be part of this equation. So I think going forward, the solution is not only internally driven at the national level. I think it should be collectively resolved through, I would say, international mechanism. And I think collaboration can take place going forward. And in fact, China even have one that might be coming up, revive again, the One Belt, One Road. Now we are talking about the Green Belt and Road Initiative. And I think hopefully in the next 1 or 2 years, there'll be more action. And I hope perhaps the world can, look together to solve the Asian conundrum without being too distracted by geopolitical propensities. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Ed, do you want to add anything or no? Okay, perfect. So I think we are out of time. So I would like to first thank the three panelists, and please join me in thanking them. So I don't know about the audience, but I learned so much, and I'm so grateful for this. So thank you so much for giving all this like food for thought and also for questions. So yeah, hopefully we can continue in thinking about these topics that are very important, and maybe get some answers and solutions all together. And yes, thank you so much, everyone. And thanks to the audience for being here and for all your questions.
Thank you, audiences. We will now be headed for a short toilet break, and the next session will begin here at 5:15 p.m. Thank you.